When the Supreme Court reversed Roe v. Wade in 2022 and eliminated national protections for abortion, religious right-wing activists and politicians became emboldened to pass abortion bans at the state level and go even further. In 2024, a case was brought to the Alabama Supreme Court that could determine the fate of the legality of in vitro fertilization, also known as IVF. A procedure where a woman's eggs are taken into a lab, one or multiple are fertilized, and are then implanted into the uterus or put into frozen storage for use at a later time. The case aimed to determine if an IVF patient who dropped and destroyed a frozen embryo was liable under an Alabama law called the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. This was an important battle for the religious right. If the plaintiffs won, it could legally determine the idea that all life begins at conception. The state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, determining that yes, it did count as a wrongful death of a minor, essentially legally stating that an embryo is a human life. The backlash against this ruling revealed widespread support among right-leaning voters. Democrats have always been firmly pro-IVF, but the right didn't always have consensus within their party in favor of IVF. What led to the right turn in favor of the procedure and why? My name is June Sternbach.
My name's Josh Borman.
This is Ill Conceived, a podcast about natalism. So, Josh, we just got done talking about abortion, the history of abortion, and sort of where we're currently at today. Roe v. Wade was sadly struck down. Abortion rights are up in the air on the state level, and it's been rather bleak in the last couple of years, seeing what the religious right has done to the women's right to choose in this country. And of course, it was all done, as the title of the show implies, that this is a podcast about natalism, which is the ideology that sees declining birth rates as the most important issue in modern American politics. And abortion has been a very contentious issue since the 70s and 80s in this country, because religious people have sort of seen abortion as taking our own hands to God's plan.
Yeah.
A
messing
big
where
problem.
you shouldn't be messing, right? This is God's plan. Yeah.
It's God's plan. We should not be messing with God's plan.
Right.
That is, I think, a big opposition to a lot of medical advancements in general, not just abortion, just generally.
I have always liked the idea that, like, God's plan is for you to get gored by a bull and, like, go septic and die. Like, it's like, what?
Yeah.
We don't use that sort of idea in other parts of medicine. Why are we using it here?
It's only used as a moral framework to take away people's rights.
Absolutely.
It's astonishing that is always truly the case. Because, why could that be God's plan? But why couldn't needing an abortion be God's plan, right? Why couldn't that be? But of course, the moral majority, they have spoken. It goes against the morality.
And they're moral, and they're the majority. Come on.
But sort of the sister issue here, and I think the reason I now, especially after doing a lot more research on this issue, why I tie it so heavily close to abortion is in vitro fertilization. It's, a very different sort of operation. But after learning about a lot of the history of abortion that we talked about in the last episode, we're kind of at that 1973 moment, possibly, in this current moment, where a lot of people are pro in vitro fertilization. Catholics are firmly against in vitro fertilization, which is astonishing to me. And it's for reasons that are similar to abortion, but a little different. But evangelicals are sort of wishy-washy at this current point, just like they were at one point with abortion.
Right. And it feels like, whereas in what we talked about last week, it was a situation where they were wishy-washy and they went firmly in the, no, this is bad and we shouldn't be allowed to do it direction.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it feels like the needle is moving in the opposite direction, maybe, in favor of allowing it, right?
It is. And it's been a really interesting look into, I think, how it outlines, again, the religious right's affinity for a natalist worldview. They do view having children as the prerogative that drives their political force. So I guess let's get into in vitro fertilization a little bit. So the very first successful birth with in vitro fertilization was in 1978. The first test tube baby, at the time people coined that phrase, the first test tube baby was born in 1978 after a long trial and error process. It took about 2 decades for them to finally get this right. I can't imagine just how complicated of a process this is. I went to school for biology, but not medical science. This was, at the time in the 70s, probably an astonishing feat of science. This was probably on par. If I had to guess, people viewed this very similarly to going out into space. The fact that you can artificially birth a child is crazy, and still to this day, honestly, it is really impressive that we can do this.
I did like how you made it sound like you went to college in the 1970s, though, where you're like, I went to college for biology in the 1970s. It was crazy. What was it like celebrating the bicentennial, June?
God, I wish. One day we'll get to time travel, and that'll be a new piece of technology. But yeah, at the time when this happened, a lot of people didn't really have any moral questions about this procedure. They were just stunned that it's possible. There were no moral questions about it. A lot of people, from what I saw looking back at the time, just saw that science is amazing and that it shows a lot of potential for what science can do for humanity, right? Like, that is a huge step in a really insane direction. But of course, as this procedure, IVF, became a lot more popular, a lot of people, especially in the late 70s and 80s, which interestingly overlaps with when a lot of religious organizations got involved with the abortion issue.
Right.
In the same time period, they started having to address IVF. And we see that it was very complicated across different religious group lines.
Yeah, and I mean, just for the opportunity for people to be able to have a kid who were not able to have a kid before for whatever reason, genuinely miraculous. Like, I feel like that's the only word you can use to describe this.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that is infertile, but for someone trying to start a family, finding out that you're infertile and can't have a child is probably heartbreaking. That is so sad. So when this technology came around, this was, and still is to this day, very life-changing for so many people. And notably, at this time, as I said before, it wasn't really a moral issue, but it wasn't even really a right or left issue either. It was just sort of cool. It was just sort of miraculous. But those pesky religious folks, they decided to get involved. They decided they wanted power. They were worried about the direction of this country, especially with technology. So by the 1980s, Catholic groups and different evangelical groups came together and decided to, for convenience and for political power purposes, come out against abortion in America.
Right.
So that's obviously, they are against, in their worldview, the taking, the murder of a human life, which they view is an embryo. They believe an embryo is human life. So you'd think that just logically, that being pro-IVF would be their stance, right? Because that is the creation of life.
Yeah, you're bringing more beautiful babies into the world where previously there were not.
Which is exactly the point of the natalist. That is the natalist ideology. You want as many children as you want. Despite that, the Catholic Church was extremely skeptical of IVF. So in 1987, the Catholic Church, by decree of the Holy See, put out a statement called "We love the Holy See. We love
to see it. We love to see it. We love to Holy See it."
And I'm just going to read the full title of this decree because I think it's incredibly funny. And if you go to the Vatican website, it's in all caps. It's just an incredibly funny statement. So it reads as: "Instruction on respect for human life in its origin and on the dignity of procreation replies to certain questions of the day." Incredible statement. Incredible title.
I mean, you can't knock them on succinctness there. It's like,
it's everything you need to know.
Everything you need to know. In one easy-to-read title.
Especially about procreation. Just great stuff. So they put this statement out, and they said that while there could be benefits for humanity in this technology, the artificial creation of life with IVF, that it gives too much power to humans, and it tempts humans to change the will of God. So their opposition to this is kind of rooted in a very similar spot as abortion, even though it's
Right.
the opposing. It's I am pro-abortion, but it is sort of the opposite direction of abortion.
Right.
So it's strange that they have the same exact logic. But I guess when you
PNV only, it's weirdly superstitious too, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is like we're going to upset God. Oh, if we do this thing, we're going to upset God, and the moral fabric of society will be tarnished and we will be punished for it. It's rooted in this idea that Catholics at this time, and more broadly, most religious people at this time, believe that life begins at conception and that an embryo is a human being.
Yeah, and this is a common, I don't know if you saw that video of Charlie Kirk debating a bunch of kids at Cambridge or whatever. And by debating, I mean he got his fucking ass handed to him. Because this is one of the things that they like to pull out that is, I guess, on the surface, when you talk about an embryo that has been created post-fertilization, it does contain distinct DNA and DNA markers from it's a combination, right, of the egg and the sperm. Obviously, that's basic biology.
Yeah.
But then to be like, that's a human, that doesn't make sense if you know anything about how the reproductive process works, because many, many times you'll have an embryo that maybe does successfully get fertilized but doesn't implant correctly, or does implant correctly but then isn't able to keep growing after a certain period of time. Like, there are so many reasons that it doesn't even get to the point where it's even something resembling a fetus, let alone an actual person. So it's this place where superstition meets a very, very facile understanding of biology.
It's a convenient equivocation. That is why they do that. They intentionally do that. They know what they're doing when they talk about this issue like that.
You're telling me Charlie Kirk doesn't operate in good faith?
No, a lot of these people do not do that. And you might be wondering, so if they find an issue with this rooted in the idea that life begins at conception, why would they have an issue with someone having this artificially grown child? And that's because, just with the process of IVF, this is something I learned while researching this, that many eggs are fertilized just to have backups. So when someone is going through the process of in vitro fertilization, the fertility clinic might have about 7 to 10 embryos that could be implanted into a woman's uterus.
Sure.
So only one of those will eventually be used, or maybe more. Maybe the woman wants multiple children. Mm-hmm. But the main issue is that Catholics see this and they're like, oh, so there's 6 other embryos, which, they view as life.
Right. That's 6 babies away. Now.
That's
right.
6 babies. That's 6 adult humans.
6 babies in cold storage.
Yeah. So they're in cold storage, and they think that is reprehensible. They find that incredibly immoral because they're locking a soul away into a frozen chamber.
Right.
So that is sort of why the main point of why they do not like IVF.
But I think it's, again, worth noting here that just strictly the way reproduction works, the embryo can't even begin to develop at all until it implants itself into the uterus.
Absolutely. But just strictly speaking, from their perspective, that doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to them that is where the embryo is able to grow into what will be a child. It's the fact that they think a soul is implanted into the embryo. It is it is, they truly believe that there is a soul locked away in a chamber. It's like a prison,
You ready for this one? Here we go.
Yeah.
Help me! Help me! That's me, the embryo locked in cold storage. That's my impression.
And it's not just that. There's 5 of you. There's 5 all doing that. There's a lot of you. See, this is where it gets complicated. So it's that. It's the idea that there is a human soul locked away in a chamber, but it's also that it takes procreation out of the creation of a child, which they believe is immoral. And that should be banned. That alone should be a justification enough to ban the practice of IVF just straight up outright. They want you to come. They want men to come into women to have children. They do not want you to have an artificial child any other way. They want you to come, is the Catholic stance.
Pope John Paul II, try not to come challenge.
Oh, fucking Christ. This is shit. Yeah, they want you to come. They don't like porn, though. So these stances laid the groundwork for the Catholic stance on IVF, even to this day, from Catholic hardliners in the general institution of the Catholic Church. Looking forward to today from Catholics, I wanted to see where they were at this current point in time, because that statement was from 1987. Maybe they have evolved a little bit on this procedure since then. So I found this guy in the Catholic Church. His name is Bishop Michael Francis Burbidge, and he said this in 2025.
Simply put, IVF is a medical procedure that aims to produce embryonic children in a clinical setting. The purpose of IVF is to provide children for anyone who wants a child. As practice, IVF both creates life and destroys life. Every successful IVF procedure results in a living child with many missing siblings. For every one of the more than 12 million children born by means of IVF since 1978, there are tens of millions missing brothers and sisters who have been either deliberately destroyed, experimented upon, or frozen in liquid nitrogen and denied their natural right to the fullness of their development.
Okay, so sounds like it hasn't changed.
Not quite. In this clip, there's a much longer clip, which if you're listening, we'll have it in the show notes. You can listen to the full 7-minute clip. But yeah, he hedges quite a bit. He does say a lot of things like, oh, people yearn for family, and this is like a way that some people find access to that. But he still, in February 2025, a month after that clip was posted, calls IVF a tragedy. He calls it all sorts of different horrible things.
Well, and you hear him say that bit too about like they're missing their siblings or whatever, that's just so strange. And that feels almost Mormon, actually. I don't know if you know anything about like Mormon cosmology.
I don't know too much.
Their approach, the LDS Church doctrine on having kids is that all of them are up in heaven waiting to come down. And when you give birth, that's just literally a child who's been up in heaven up until this point, just kind of chilling, coming down and coming into the world.
You were like a preset that God made, and it was like, all right, you're going to go into that body. You're this one. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
No, that is a very similar way to view this, honestly, because it sounds like he's in that clip is talking about, of course, the embryos in storage, where he's like, oh, these people are all humans that are alive and they're missing these children. And it is such a strange way to frame this issue. I think the entire hinge on this is that they truly believe that there's a soul in these embryos. I don't really know any other explanation other than that being the reason why they think that. So despite this really harsh condemnation from within the Catholic Church for the last 50 years, Catholics all across the world heavily approve of the procedure. And only about 13% of Catholics believe that IVF is immoral. And that was cited from 2013. Yeah. So Catholics are very pro IVF. Which is really interesting with how the church talks about it. Because if you had to take a guess, looking at the top down of the church, you'd be like, oh, the Catholic believers are in line, which they just aren't.
Well, because, I mean, you compare it to something like abortion, and at least among conservative Catholics, there's still strong opposition, which is also the position of the church.
And it just goes to show that it's not as salient of an issue as abortion was to like rile up people. They're not creating fire underneath them to get people upset about this.
Well, how could it, right? Saying you've got your potential ghost children in a freezer somewhere, that doesn't light a fire under your belly in the same way as like, these children are getting killed. These are babies that should be born and they're not because our feminist culture wants to kill all the babies. It doesn't make you burn in the same way.
Yeah, because like the way that they would have to do that is like people that can't have children are now able to have children.
Exactly.
And it's like,
exactly.
Oh, right. That's bad?
Right.
Yeah, that just is immaterial, an immaterial problem for the average person. And just to sort of reiterate just how top down against IVF the Catholic Church is, the much beloved progressive Pope Francis also believes that IVF was despicable. So this wasn't just, a random bishop. This is top down within the organization of the Catholic Church. So I just think that is a really astonishing difference between the believers and the leaders. So while the Catholic Church itself, not so much the believers, have had a clear stance against IVF for nearly 4 decades now, the evangelical religious right has been given less guidance on in vitro fertilization.
Okay, the part I'm interested in, the evangelicals.
Yeah.
By the way, I did just want to throw out again, for those who don't know what evangelicalism is, how it differentiates from Catholicism, 3 main points that I think are worth noting. Number 1, you have a personal relationship with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ that's sort of grounded in this experience of converting, right? Being born again. You had this moment where once you were blind and now you see. Thing number 2, that experience then causes you to want to evangelize on Christ's behalf and make other people Christians. And thing number 3, that you want to see political society ordered along Christian lines, or Christian as you understand Christianity to be, I should say.
Right.
And that's also why I think it's interesting, this question, because if among evangelicals, it's not really a settled question as to what the Christian approach, with heavy air quotes, is for IVF, what does that then do to how you regulate that practice as a political governing project?
And turns out that lack of focus from this religious right has led to this practice being, again, just like the Catholics, generally well liked by a lot of evangelicals. And I think what's interesting is that this is very similar. The last episode of us talking about abortion, where this is in a similar spot that I do think will go the opposite direction as abortion was in like the 1970s, where evangelicals were more or less morally questioning it, but were okay with its existence and often use it themselves.
I mean, to be clear, also, evangelicals also get abortions. They just don't talk about it. I needed to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So due to this lack of decree from evangelical denominations, a lot of religiously radical right-wing writers have noted that they want stronger guidance from their religious institutions on this issue. So evangelical groups like Focus on the Family, like we've alluded to a lot, we really need to do an episode on them soon because their tentacles are everywhere.
Yes.
Focus on the Family has been long concerned with the same moral questions as Catholics about IVF. So just like them, the cryopreserved embryos, freezing of the supposed child with a soul. It goes against God's design. And in addition, which wasn't really touched on from what I found from Catholics, but they believe that only a married father and a mother, please note, mother and a father, not parents, should raise children.
That sounds like Focus on the Family, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they are anti-gay, and they don't think that single parents should be raising children. Right. They think that will leave, like that will stunt the child.
Well, the idea is that you need a strong male and female figure to sort of emulate gender from. They're very strongly concerned with the idea that the two genders, which there are obviously,
right,
complement each other very specifically and directly. And so every child needs those models. And if they're not getting one of each, they're going to be fucked up. They're going to probably grow up and become gay or some shit.
Yeah, yeah. And that is the most immoral thing a human being could do, is be gay or trans.
Right. And it's also true, to be clear.
And it rocks.
And
Let's be clear, it rocks.
It's cool.
It's so fucking cool.
It's good to me.
So despite all of these religious moral questions that they have about it, they still have not made, none of these groups have made a clear stance for or against IVF, which I think is interesting, an interesting departure from the Catholic belief system, where they're still sort of like, it's we want there to be this nuclear family dynamic, but it doesn't, we don't really know how to feel about it.
Right. And it makes sense that they're not willing to fully come out against it, because a lot of people who are going to be within their organizational reach are going to be people who are using IVF for one reason or another. And so it doesn't really surprise me that, like, they'll talk about how you can use it, and here's some things to think about if you're going to be using it. We're not going to say that it's good necessarily.
Right.
We're not going to say that it's bad either. We're just going to present it as an option that is available and is kind of value neutral, other than help me.
and so they are kind of in that neutral gray zone. I found some of these writers for some of these articles talking about the desire for stronger leadership from the church tend to be anti-IVF, but generally it's very neutral, or IVF is all right. And so I decided to go on the Focus on the Family website to look at their guidance on IVF, because I was like, maybe they are still to this day neutral about it. I want to know what they have to say about it today. So I'm going to read this portion from their website. This is directed at a religious person who is considering IVF.
Yes, the average Focus on the Family reader.
Always check their website first,
Got it.
is what I'm saying. They should consult a fertility specialist, one who's a Christian, if possible. The views and approach of a Christian physician are far more likely to line up with pro-life values than those of a doctor who doesn't hold a biblical perspective.
The fuck does that mean?
Yeah, so they're like, you can like consult with these people, you can even do the process, but make sure the doctor performing this is godly.
A Christian.
He's a Christian. Make sure he's pro-life. Make sure he likes that we're anti-abortion.
Okay.
That's one of their main like considerations. The other main consideration is that you pray really hard about it. You really need to pray hard about this idea. Like, maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not in God's plan for you to get IVF.
Yeah. Prayerful consideration. Absolutely.
Exactly. So those are like the two main pieces I found from their website about IVF. Again, very neutral language. This was in 2025. Due to this lack of clear guidance, evangelicals have decided to make their own decisions and have acted upon them. Despite the less harsh language from evangelical leaders, as Catholics, evangelicals tend to have a much more negative view on IVF.
Oh, interesting.
They have white evangelical Protestants. As of 2013, 75% of them think it's immoral.
Really?
Compared to, which is really high. You'd think that Catholics would be a lot more harsh. But it's just not the case.
Huh.
Yeah. It's probably just in line with how they view tampering medically with the human body as like immoral. I would imagine it has to do with that.
That's fascinating. I mean, it is also interesting that those are 2013 numbers. I do wonder what it would look like if you were to like poll again now, in 2025. Because I wouldn't be at all surprised if things have shifted toward more in favor of IVF, given that, it's a more readily accessible procedure and more evangelicals have actually had kids using that process.
So it's interesting that you bring up today. So as of today, white evangelicals, 63% believe that IVF is a good thing.
Is morally good. Okay.
Morally good.
That's as of this year or?
As of 2024.
Okay. And do you have the percentage that say that it's immoral?
Only 9%.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a total like black and white reversal. That's really interesting.
It's a huge shift, and it is probably just due to the fact that so many people know someone that has utilized IVF.
Right.
I think with a lot of social issues, gay rights being one of them, a lot of the public opinion eventually did shift in the direction of being pro-gay, and in this case, pro-IVF, was that everyone knows at least someone that's used IVF.
Which is why I think it's so important for people to talk about their abortions. I sort of alluded to this in the last episode, just like how common it is, right? And how so many people have so many different stories about it. I genuinely believe that if people were willing to speak about this stuff more openly and share their stories about their experiences with abortion, it wouldn't be possible to stigmatize it in the same way as this immoral thing, because you now have a person who who's had that thing, done that thing, and had it improve their life in a meaningful way.
It really humanizes certain issues that can become so vicious, especially culture issues. Talking to someone who has experienced these things really does humanize it. And this is just a great example of it. So while a lot of evangelical leaders, religious leaders and pastors tend to be pretty harsh with IVF, a lot of evangelical believers, they do like IVF, but they still believe that the embryos that are in storage are humans. So the main thing that they want to do is they want to ensure there's programs out there to make sure that these embryos in storage get like used, I guess is how I can put it. Like imagine like there is like a matching. Like you're going on Tinder to find a suitable embryo. You're trying to find a suitable embryo for your uterus. So there are different evangelical groups putting together these like programs to match.
Oh, that is so
mothers.
Weird.
It's very weird because it lines up with they want to like free these cold storage souls is what it is. And it sort of balances out the moral quandary for them is if there is no storage of these embryos, it doesn't sound as bad.
Or if the storage only takes a limited period of time and eventually that, yeah.
So the modern evangelical approach has really kind of been brought down to the individual believer level in a way that is so interesting and it's kind of surprising, especially compared to their stance on abortion, where they are typically very anti-abortion. But on this stance, I think being pro-IVF is just obvious. It's really interesting and cool to see these groups kind of come around on this issue, and I almost don't know how to feel about it. It's like great, but I'm like, where's the catch here, right?
Well, I mean, I'll say what the catch is the story that you told up top, right? About how if these embryos are defined as persons with legal rights, up to and including like civil rights that you can sue for.
That's the whole thing. That would be huge for them. And that is the ultimate thing is they want to legally define embryos as humans. And there are still influencers online, these family religious influencers like Candace Owens, who have publicly come out against IVF and love to spread lies about the procedure. One of them being that mothers who go through the implantation process will have it be rejected, which I believe is possible, but she way overstates.
Well, yeah, of course it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
Of course it's possible for the implantation to not work.
Yeah.
That's reproduction.
Yeah, that happens like every time you don't get pregnant.
Yes.
Yes. So there is just like a weird battle going on with this right now, and it seems like the pro-IVF side is winning. So in the wake of Roe v. Wade being struck down and the battle intensifying about restricting abortion and defining what is a human, there has been a really interesting battle taking place within the Republican Party right now, where Donald Trump himself and his administration is seemingly across the board pro-IVF, and they want to expand access to it. But the religious right, a lot of these religious leaders among Catholics and some evangelicals are butting heads with him because they're anti-IVF. So religious activists want to take these moral concerns like they did with abortion and legislate this into law. And, these groups claim that they only just want restrictions. There's just certain restrictions on IVF. But as we know how it went with abortion, that's not really the case. They just want to ban it outright.
But I can't see this movement picking up steam as a popular idea. Like there are just so many people at this point who have experienced positive outcomes as a result of this. And unlike abortion, it's just not something that's easy to run interference for. It's not like, I think that these people are kind of on the fringes, even within their pretty reactionary spheres. Because also, you want to talk about natalism, which we do frequently. This is a great way to get people having more kids.
Absolutely. And that is why Donald Trump's administration, which I think we have coined the fertilization administration, a great way for them to encourage that. This has been a big, at least in Donald Trump's sphere, he has been touting this as one of his bigger accomplishments is expanding access to IVF because they do want to increase the birth rate, albeit probably mostly white people. But that is still a goal that this achieves, is expanded access to IVF, which is, again, despite I have a lot of criticisms of the modern right-wing natalism movement, but this is sort of this is good, I think, as a whole. I think it's generally good to expand access to IVF.
Yes, the availability of this form of care and this form of reproductive family planning is good. This is a
It's
good
great.
thing. But
It gives so much people so much more opportunity.
I am interested in, and I'm definitely going to want to do more reading into this thing of let's make sure that all of our good Christians can get all of these embryos and make these babies happen. Because to me, that recalls very strongly the adoption industry.
Right.
And the way that adoption, which I think is a good thing on the merits, it's good for people who otherwise would not have the opportunity to be in a home with a family, to be in a home with a family. That's good.
It's great.
However, when the project is about making sure that these kids are placed in as many Christian homes
Yes.
as possible, evangelical Christian homes with very specific ideas, that's no longer a project of care for these kids. It is a project of ideology.
It is.
And it is a project of, although not technically natalist, these kids have already been born, obviously, it is a project of advancing a very specific ideology through demographic capture, I guess, right? It's
Absolutely.
taking people who otherwise might not be in the religious sphere and then putting them into circumstances where they are far more likely to have that outcome as a result of their upbringing. And I think the embryo thing is the same way.
That's a wonderful point that I didn't really touch on while describing. So that group that is trying to encourage different fertility clinics to release, I guess, all of these embryos that they have in storage. They're called the snowflake babies.
Okay.
It is a very religious founded group. It is based in evangelical Christian ideology, and that is the danger of some of this. Because they do want that expanded religious control and growth. So a lot of these religious leaders that are anti-IVF are trying to treat this as if it has the same salience as the abortion issue. They just think if they can constantly hammer on IVF being immoral, that they can eventually whittle down public support. But as we've seen in just the last 10 years, support for IVF has grown so much, and it's far beyond anything that I think a religious group can handle and revert at this point, especially as Donald Trump's administration has come out very strongly in favor of IVF.
Well, and that's the weird thing too, right? This is one of the few places where there is bipartisan consensus.
We don't get a lot of that these days.
Even though Democrats and Republicans are coming at it from very different angles.
It is a different angle. As I laid out earlier, Democrats have always been pretty pro-IVF throughout all of its history. And in the wake of Roe v. Wade being taken down, and especially in these states like Alabama and another one being Kentucky, where there's these cases that are seemingly outlining that embryos are human lives, a lot of Democrats are introducing laws to expand protections for IVF.
Right. As a procedure, but not for like protections of the embryos themselves. And that's a really important distinction, because I think that in the cases of, like, I guess you could say Republican approach, the right-wing approach to IVF, I think you're going to see these things tied together.
100%.
Whereas the approach from Democrats, obviously you're not, because these aren't babies.
Right. And that's where a lot of, despite what you think is a very bipartisan issue on the face, which it does seem like that, but a lot of Republicans in these states and even in the Senate are rejecting these bills likely due to that. They want the inclusion of embryos are babies. They want these protections.
They need that protection before they are willing to make it readily available.
And that makes sense. And that is where the current battleground is at this point. They are pro-IVF, but they're using that as sort of a wedge issue to bring in those religious elements into the law, which is extremely concerning, and probably why we won't really see a lot of movement on this issue within the Senate or like a national level for the next couple of years. The approach is just very heavily contested between Democrats and Republicans. Another interesting part while I was researching with this, as I learned that a lot of religious organizations, especially the Catholic Church, as I outlined before, are really, really anti-IVF, that they have been feuding with Donald Trump ever since he's become president. And the aforementioned Bishop Burbidge has directly called out Donald Trump by name as being way too willing. Yeah, he has sort of feuded with him and called out his willingness to expand access to IVF, which I just think is so fascinating. It's such a inversion of the coalition of the anti-abortion issue.
Mhm.
The religious right has really lost a lot of ground, at least as far as it goes from the religious institutions. Like I said before, Republicans are still sort of on board with getting that religious framing in bills into law. But these religious organizations, especially Catholics, really do not like the direction that Donald Trump is taking this, which I just think is
Sure.
fascinating. So funny.
Yeah. Ultimately, what it comes down to is, can you use it as a wedge?
Right.
And as I think we discovered last week, you can make things into a wedge that were not a wedge up until a certain point, but they need to be things where the entire coalition can find some semblance of consensus.
Right.
They need to agree on the broad strokes. And I think it seems to me like this is just one where the majority has already kind of come out in support of this thing. And I just don't think that the minority idea is going to be able to gain any real purchase.
Yeah, it does seem like that ship has passed for these religious groups. This is not going to be the wedge that I think they were hoping this was going to be, in the same way that abortion was, the same way that trans issues have been. So despite this, a lot of activists for IVF do worry about where this is going to go, especially in 2026. We're going to see IVF being talked about a lot more in the future, I think, than we ever really had in the past. And I do think we'll see, especially depending on how the 2026 midterm election goes, we'll see a lot of movement on that. I think if Democrats win, there will be a lot more of these like secular protections for IVF. I think if Republicans start to gain a little bit more power than they already have, we'll see them keep trying to make the argument around religious issues, especially with embryos being human life. The most interesting thing to me at the end of the day here is that not everything can become a wedge issue for these religious right, which is sort of relieving in a sense, but it's also terrifying when it does work.
Yeah.
Because they still are able to do it sometimes.
Well, right. I think it's that. And I think it's also, to go back to the point about natalism, at least as regards the right wing, the policy that's going to result in more people being born, that's the one that's going to win out, at least for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. So thank you again for listening to Ill Conceived. My name is June.
My name's Josh.
See ya.
Bye.